Wheel of Genre, the show for listeners who can last all 8 seconds on a mechanical bull. Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF. It's all on the shelf. And right now we are starting a new romance cycle. This time with Lyla Sage's Lost and Lassoed. I'm Zach. This week I'm super interested in the total optimism of the world that is not just being built here, but I guess really continued here from the previous books.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in, I guess, the enemies to lovers trope. We kind of saw it in book 1, and now we see it in a different way in book 3, and it's got to get more complicated, and I think it does. Zach, I want to ask you, I love these books. I think they're absolutely incredible. And last time when we did this with the Witty Banter book club with Courtney and Maddie, we talked about, wow, this is like our Harry Potter. We're so excited for the next books to come out.
Yeah.
Was it satisfying for you? I thought it was a great third book.
Yeah. So book 1 featured Emmy and Brooks getting together, and then the other family member, Wes, gets together with Ada in the second book. And now in this one, we have Teddy and Gus. Gus is the older brother. So we're kind of put in this world, right? This cowboy romance world, and we know it's going to happen because we're just going through the family members and hooking them up with their true loves. There's a kind of like inevitability of it. Like it's like a cosmic force of how every member of this family is just going to meet their lover, and they're all going to be people who are like within their extended social circle. But the question you asked is, was it good? Was I happy with it? And I think the answer to that is really complicated because I love the world we're in. I'm so happy to return. And yet I'm starting to feel like, okay, like what's next? Where can this go from here? And we know there's a 4th book coming, but beyond just like hooking characters up, what else can this world do?
That's an interesting question. I totally know who the next couple is. I will put money on it. But I think it is interesting when you have a genre like this that is such a mainstay genre, romance. If it's going to be the same thing again and again, you just have to switch out different tropes. You know, this one's special because now it's cowboys. And maybe Lyla Sage, I don't know if that's her real name or not, but this author knows probably how many can I really get away with and still do a good job. So she chose 4. It's interesting now, though, on Amazon, there are tons of copycat books, and I'm sure lots of them are pretty good, but there are tons of new cowboy romances coming out with similar covers. Not just cowboy romances, but cowboy romances in the style of Lyla Sage. But the idea of like running its course, I wonder if this author would ever get tired of writing these books. I think it is so satisfying, like you said, to come back to this world, to come to Rebel Blue Ranch, see Amos, see all, his whole family, and see, yes, it is a sweet family. It's nice, it's cozy, but I am entertained every time. I love it every time. Maybe by book 5, there's no book 5, but if we got to that, maybe it would be too much.
Sure.
I doubt it though, Zach.
Yeah, well, I want to like think about the fact that there's multiple, like I haven't seen them, but what you're telling me, there's already copycat books. I think like to make a copycat book of this would to miss the essence of what makes this series so good, which is that okay, so the big idea is it's a cowboy romance. It's a romance novel set in the rural, I don't want to say like American West because it's Wyoming.
It's Wyoming.
So that's the West, but it's up there. It's up, it's not like a gunslinging cowboy, romance, which would be interesting to read, but no, it's more like a rancher romance. But that's neither here nor there because those are just like the over the top kind of cultural signifiers that get placed over it. What's good about this story has nothing to do with the fact that it's a cowboy romance. What's good about it is the fact that it's like a story with so much heart and so much optimism and so much okay. So these are books with no antagonists, right? Like if you think back to like Danielle Steele's work, where you have like what do we read? The Promise, where you
They're
have
like
a
super
wicked
villains.
yeah, you have like a wicked mother who's leading the two lovers astray and lying to both of them, and you just can't believe how evil this woman is to keep our protagonist away from her true love because she thinks he's cheap or whatever. You know, that's a villain. These books have no villain, right? It's all good people. It's all good feelings. There's miscommunications, there's misdirects, there's negative feelings towards each other, but everyone is fundamentally a good person. And that's what makes it feel so good to be in the world of Rebel Blue.
This is something I think is very interesting because we've read other romance books, and another one that we got to do with another great podcast, Twilight Phase. Twilight, also a classic. And I think that that is actually very similar to this because here we have the Andersons, right? They're all the Andersons. Oh, wait, they're the writers. Teddy Anderson. Sorry. The writers are this perfect family. And then Amos is he's the owner of Rebel Blue Ranch. He takes care of his family, and it's said that he always brings in strays. So, Teddy Anderson's dad, Hank, comes and starts working for Amos when he has nowhere else to go. But that's because his life has suddenly changed. He's got Teddy given to him, and Teddy's mom just runs off. So he suddenly has no mother to help raise Teddy. Then also, Brooks's dad is not in the picture at all. So there are kind of people who don't quite fit and leave, and they never come back. But it reminds me of the Cullens, where you have this totally idyllic, perfect family that everyone loves. Because even in Meadowlark, they say when Brooks and Emmy are going to get married, they're calling it the royal wedding.
Yeah,
because this family they're the celebrities in Meadowlark. So it's idyllic, but there are some people who don't really fit that idyllic sense. That are a little bit villainous. They're forgiven, but they're a little bit villainous.
I think they're part of the, like, you need, like, it can't be all sweet. You need a little bit of bitter to emphasize the sweetness, I think. And that bitterness isn't an actively malevolent person. It's more like a bitter situation. Teddy's father having a heart attack, for example, or the Ryder family's mom dying early on. Like, these aren't things that actively are. There's no instances of evil, if that makes sense, or violence or anything like that. It's all what it gives you is people who are facing adversity, facing struggle, facing disabilities. I think dyslexia played a role in this, and I think there was a few others in the previous books. My mind is blanking right now, but this is all like background adversity. And then what you get with these characters aren't people who are like brooding on it or bitter about it. It's not a Dostoevsky novel. They're not, contemplating suicide. They're all meeting their challenges head on and with optimism and with grace. And it just, everyone is just this super positive example of how to be a person.
Definitely, I would say grace. I think grace is a huge part of this book. Everyone is extending each other grace. But I think that is such a nice part about book 3, where in the beginning, book 1, Lyla even writes it at the very beginning, for everyone who was waiting for this inevitable romance between Gus and Teddy. Now, here's your book. When you saw it coming in chapter 3 of book 1, because they are at each other's throats. They're like, we all saw it. Come on. They are the Beatrice and Benedict from Much Ado About Nothing, where they are at each other's throats. They hate each other. They tell each other they hate each other. But it's all because a romance 7 years ago had almost blossomed. But these are two people who have a problem opening up or having a problem loving. Gus is so independent and he wants to solve everyone's problems. He wants to solve all of his family's problems, and he wants to be the Rock. Not Dwayne the Rock Johnson, but he wants to be the the shoulder that everyone else can cry on, and he refuses ever to cry on anyone else's shoulder. So there is a block here, and we've known that that's very important for romances, but I think this block is so interesting because it's a romance that started and then had to stop, and they both they're both feeling cold about it. I guess they're left cold, and they have a kind of resentment that they can't talk about, they can't acknowledge it. And that's what's keeping them apart, is this sort of resentment.
And I'll give Lyla Sage credit in that I think that if this was a full story of just them being resentful to each other and them at each other's heads the whole time, I would be quite bored. But we move beyond that very, very quickly. And that's not to say there's something wrong with the conflict, but like their role in the previous books to me was always one of, they were always delegated to secondary character because their relationships with each other were so one-dimensional. And the fact that, they're just always going to be at arms. There's always obviously going to be some kind of tension there, but they never were fleshed out in the same way that the other characters were. And I was a little bit worried that this book was just going to keep them in that one-dimensionality, but it really turns itself around. Like some of the key highlights for me on Teddy's angle would be like reframing her presentation. So like if someone is that obsessed with clothes, you think, okay, it's, but it turns it into, for her, quote, clothing is a kind of armor that she wears. She is obsessed with clothing because it's a protective measure against kind of the social obligations of the world around her and from damage from others, I guess. And then it rewrites some of the motivations from previous books. So like in book 1, Gus punches Brooks in the face for sleeping with his sister. But, what we learn is that he's not mad at him. In this book, what's revealed is he's not mad at him for sleeping with his sister per se. It's that he's mad because Brooks has the kind of life that he wants to have, which is like, great. With a partner, I don't know, delightful stuff.
And the author gets that feeling so well in the writing because you can feel his yearning. He's always watching his brother and his sister Emmy and Brooks together, his best friend, and he's so not jealous. He's jealous, but it's also that is the ideal. So he loves it. He's happy for them, but he can't have it. And it's the same for Emmy because she loves that they're together, but she's suffering in a different kind of way where now she and her friend are kind of drifting apart. She knows that everyone else is moving on. And she says this to Dusty, who's like the ranch hand. And I have a feeling, anyway, I won't say any spoilers, but she's talking to Dusty at the diner. And she's saying, do you feel like everyone has left us behind? Are we in a different life? Are we stuck? So she is losing her friend, and that's going to be a big part of her, something that she has to overcome and something that she has to talk with Emmy about, just like Brooks and Gus have to talk about something they have to overcome to maintain their friendship and also pursue this new romance that everyone thought was impossible or wrong, or that their love between each other is always taboo. Book 1 and book 3, it's what everyone kind of feels is inevitable, but also it just can't happen. It's a forbidden romance, kind of.
I want to go back to that scene that you were talking about, because that scene in the diner, does it feel like everyone else has moved on and we're kind of stuck being ourselves? Because to me, at the moment, it felt like maybe like the clown's final act, if that makes sense. The clown realizing that like they're no longer funny or something, like in the sense that she's always kind of been the wisecracker. She's always been the party girl, but then like the world has changed, but she's still the same person. And where does she go from here? But what we ended up getting actually was this really interesting transformation from her being kind of like a child in a grown woman's body, if that makes sense. Like she's Peter Panette.
Yes.
She's she hasn't grown up while everyone else has grown up around her. But then that transformation she has in babysitting Riley, Gus's daughter, right? Riley?
Yep, Riley. Yep.
Yeah. In babysitting Riley, she turns into a mother type figure for Riley. Like she learned, like by means of caring for a child, she allows herself to grow up from being little girl to mother. And it's cool. It's cool stuff.
Yes, the Puella Eterna, as we have been diving into Jung. I think it's so interesting too because we've seen in romances it's really important to support one's growth. Yes, they've been at each other's throats, but also this book is, I think, like many romances where it goes back and forth between two perspectives, where it's Teddy and then it's Gus, and it's Teddy and then it's Gus. And so Gus will often reveal to us, wow, he feels like she's glowing as she is coming into herself. And while he watches that, he is so supportive and so excited. She likewise, whenever Gus it's a big deal for him to ask for help. And he eventually asks his dad. It's a moment that just makes you cry. This whole book is full of it. But he says, Dad, can I have a day off? Because he has to go and chase Teddy down to, save this relationship, which is almost going to die. But that is such a touching moment where these two people don't just thirst for each other. It's a very thirsty book, but they don't just thirst for each other. They don't just want each other. It's not just a romance that's going to fizzle out. They are so thrilled, almost hornily so, to see each other develop and become better people.
Let's talk about what you just brought up in brief, but the fact that this book is told through two character perspectives. Yeah, not that kind of briefs. How do you feel? We've talked about this last time we talked about Lyla Sage's work, but how do you feel like in this book, Lyla Sage portrays two different characters? What thoughts do you have on it?
Well, you said it. You said this earlier, but every time one of the characters has some sort of issue that they're going through and they've dealt with, and the other person has to slowly find out about it. I think in book 2, Ada has ADHD that has gotten her into trouble at her job. It's hard for her to stay on. Well, she can stay on task, but she kind of does too much or can't get her things together. And then Wes had really severe depression and was taking pills and sometimes goes into really dark, depressive episodes where his family has to help him out. And now this one is lighter, but it's very touching because Gus has pretty serious, like very serious dyslexia. And he previews his daughter's books. She's about, I think, 5 or 6, Riley's books, so he can read to her smoothly and not be embarrassed. And that is such a cute moment, I think. But there are great, I think, in-depth moments where the characters are telling us everything that they're struggling with and that they're learning by being with this other person. Again, they are both so fiercely independent. And we already talked about Gus. He has to learn how to, cry on others' shoulders and depend on others because, as Teddy tells him, look, Gus, you're kind of an asshole. And maybe you'd be less of an asshole if you could open up to others and depend on others a little bit more. And same with Teddy. She tells us a lot about how much Meadowlark means to her. And I think that's when she's talking to Dusty. Dusty did the opposite. He went off, kind of like Emmy, and just left Meadowlark completely. He went and traveled for many, many years and then has finally come back. But for Teddy, she has never wanted to leave, and it's been essential for her. But she has this deep fear of, is that enough? Have I made the wrong decision? It's interesting to see her really love Meadowlark, but also being afraid of life having totally passed her by because she made that decision to stay. I think it's very effective to see these two characters. It's jarring at first because they're telling us so much in first person, but once you get used to it, it's very real and very interesting. It's a terrible analysis. I just love the two characters and how much they tell us about what they're struggling with.
I agree with you that Lyla Sage does do kind of like plot conflict through character revelation. Lyla Sage is very good at playing off what the reader knows versus like what information the reader is privileged to know through both windows into this world versus what the two characters do not know about each other. And Lyla Sage is very good at playing off of that in a very fun and interesting to read way.
She's very good at that. I think one of my favorite elements of that, to bring an example, is the vet. And I can't remember his name either, and no one seems to remember his name. He's just the vet. He's the sexy vet who different characters have had kind of relationships with. And there's a moment when things Lyla Sage is also very good at getting our hopes up, and then something bad happens, and it throws it's like throwing a monkey wrench into the relationship, but it's a very realistic monkey wrench. So things have gone really well with Gus and Teddy, and they've had their first kiss after 7 years of a kiss before. It was, the taboo kiss. But now, the next morning, things have gone so well. Gus sees Teddy kind of flirting with the vet. And we know later, because we get back to her perspective, why she's flirting with the vet. But he doesn't know for chapters and chapters. And he's just, it's like a gut punch for him. And he's like, oh, the whole relationship is ruined. I can't believe this is happening. I need to figure something out. But he doesn't talk about things. So he's just angry. But that was really fun to see, one, the suspense for us as readers. Two, the kind of masterful little turn that Lyla Sage does, because it's not just suspense for suspense's sake. It's also, look, Gus, this is your flaw. Still, you're still causing this because you're overthinking and you think that you can control everything.
Every book, right? We get a different pair of characters that you get the same dichotomy in the same two windows. The only thing that, I don't want to say it bothers me, but it leaves me wanting a little bit, is the fact that we don't get like Emmy and Brooks, they're barely characters in this. I mean, a couple lines, but I miss them as people. I miss them as characters. I miss their interiority. And if Ada and Wes even had a speaking role in this book, I would be surprised. I remember Ada. I do not remember Wes popping up a single time for any line of dialogue. He's just kind of like a background character. But we just read a whole book about Ada and Wes. I like those characters. I want to see them again. And that's something that, I don't know, I would be interested in like a Game of Thrones style sequel to this, where it features the interiority of every single character that we've met so far. Because I mean, it's not a bad thing that we've moved on past them, but it's just a bad thing in the sense that I miss them. Did you find yourself missing them at all, or out of sight, out of mind for you?
No, I think they're great characters. I loved the second book a lot because I feel like they're fun, quirky characters. They were easy to get along with. Brooks was hilarious in the first book. I loved him, so it was disappointing not to see him very much. But you still get to see him, being a way too tall, super charismatic, serving up Fireball at the bars. It's kind of fun. But yeah, that would be an interesting other kind of romance. I think there's lots of fantasy romances where it is more like that, where it's not, you do kind of pivot and see multiple pairs going on, where Game of Thrones is more of the epic fantasy and there happens to be romance. I think maybe something like, I think you and I have read some of these, Court of Thorns and Roses. That's Guns N' Roses. Court of Thorns.
I still haven't read those.
They're not as good as this, to be honest. I wouldn't really recommend them. But it's mostly one character, but then kind of courting other different male suitors, sort of. So it's not exactly our idea, but that would be cool. A high epic fantasy romance, or a cowboy romance of an epic scale. That would be fun.
I just miss them. That's all.
Oh, okay. Well, wait, this is, I want to throw this at you. Did you know Universal, this is old news, but I think in March of last year, they acquired the rights to this, so they're going to make a TV show.
I saw that today. I was finishing up this book, and I was like, there's no way that some TV producer hasn't come knocking. So I Googled this morning, and I was like, all right, yeah, we'll be seeing this soon. I'm really interested to see who they cast in all these characters. TBH. I know that, what was the other book we read kind of recently, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, that is getting a film adaptation soon? Beach Read.
Oh, Beach Read. That's making, I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah. They announced the casting for that. I think people were either happy or not happy. I don't know. I don't keep up with that, but I saw some chatter around like who they announced like is going to be playing each of the people.
I got a question for you. We haven't talked much about the sexiness of this book, and boy, is it sexy. But we talked about this a little bit earlier. There's that kiss 7 years ago, and it's hinted to us throughout the book, and we're not sure exactly what they did. We know that they have a past, and it's just slowly hinted at, eventually revealed, oh, they kissed 7 years ago, and that broke both of their hearts because he just decides in the spur of a moment, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't make any decisions. I have to protect the ranch. And he just says, this has to end now. Then 7 years later, it all comes back. But I think there's a sexiness to this scene because she says, no kiss. And this is a weird sexiness, but it's an interesting taboo that is established because it's about the character's romance. And it's not just some random taboo that's thrown in, which could also be fine. But I think it's very special because they have to get around not kissing for their first sex scene because of a relationship formed taboo. And I don't know if I've seen that before, where the sexiness and the forbiddenness is because of that past.
Yeah, that was interesting. And I think that part of what makes this book so well constructed is that it's a big secret. Why? It's a big, it is a secret and it's a mid-book reveal about what happened 7 years ago. And it's funny because I was expecting it to be much, much more either dramatic or much more like hookup-y, but actually it was just like a kiss outside of a bar. It was simultaneously like anticlimactic, but also like the buildup to it was really, really interesting because it shows that like a comparatively minor act leaves such a major emotional impact on the characters, or at least on Teddy, maybe less so on Gus. But yeah, I get what you're saying about that first kiss taboo, or I guess it would be the second kiss taboo. Yeah, I will say I find these books to be not very erotic. I find them to be more like witty, and I don't want to say PG, but it feels more like it's just so feel good and kind of fantasy that or you have like an erotic moment, but it's like they'll say these lines that totally like pop the balloon, so to speak. Like I'm ready for the Last Supper or something like that.
Oh, I thought that was
says.
amazing. I loved that.
I mean, it's funny. It's funny. There's also like, do you want to ride the stash or something like that? I wish I'd written these lines down, but like,
I got them memorized. I could.
Oh, good. Yeah. Back a pocket for when you need them. But like, I'm reading it and I'm like, I'm in the book. And then I get some of these lines that are like funny, but more like cute than lewd, if that makes sense. And I'm just kind of like, huh.
I love it. I think it's so sexy. I think all those scenes are really well written. I know that they're funny, but I think it's realistic. I loved. I guess they're pretty similar throughout the 3 books. I guess.
Yeah.
They kind of have the same structure, but that's fine. I still think that I think they're sexy. I'm totally drawn into that scene. I shouldn't say much more than that, but I think they're great. I had a question, though. I think there's something interesting about her construction of these things because she's very good at putting these sex scenes at really great moments, and she's very good at constructing this book. Earlier, you talked about the kiss, and I think it's very cool that it happens at the Devil's Boot. And you said earlier, the first one is private because no one sees them kissing, and no one ever knew that they kissed. And yes, maybe that is not much for other people, but for them, they are definitely meant to be together. And even that it's just a kiss, there's that electricity. And when it's cut off, their lives kind of can't develop because they're fated to be together. Then 7 years later, the next kiss that they have in public is super public. Now everyone knows, the whole town knows. They're kind of sealing the deal on something that had to be secret and forbidden. Now is a public declaration of their love. Similarly, I think there's an interesting placement of the eroticism and kind of the hominess, not homeliness, but anyway, the good value, small American town positivity, because and maybe some of the tragedy, because their first sex scene right after in the morning, he has to wake Teddy up and say, "Look, Teddy, your dad, it's okay, but he's stable. He's in the hospital. We have to go there now. So they've had this wonderful moment, and now it might be taken away again because now we've entered into tragedy. I think Lila Sage is really good at pairing these two things of things have gone really well, love is coming, but then also everything that we love is now in jeopardy again too. And will this new love survive, or is it in a jeopardy that it can't survive?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like razor sharp pacing, right? It's like as soon as we get the kind of like the climax in more ways than one between plot and character, it's mere hours later they're woken up by a phone call in the middle of the night that tragedy has struck. And the book wastes no time in building towards the next thing, delivering it, and then building towards the next thing after that. I mean, I think the strong pacing of the book, in addition to the other things I mentioned before, is part of why it's so beloved, or why this series is so beloved, why this author is so beloved, is because it's imminently readable. You just, it's always holding your hand to the next situation.
There's another thing that I think is good. Earlier, you said that it has heart when we first started talking about this book, and I think it does have heart. And I love the dedication that she does at the very end, because I can imagine that starting this book would be very frightening, because I don't think she's done many books before this. This is her first series, I think, and it just took off all of a sudden. So she says in her dedication, I was really worried about writing this book because everyone wants this couple to happen. And now this is book 3. I don't know if I can do it. And she said that she told her dad that. Her dad, of course, was super supportive and said, look, you'll get it. You'll find the inspiration. But what she says is, I haven't found the book's voice yet. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I just know I have to make it happen. And she felt the pressure of, this is what everyone wants. I don't want to let anyone down. And she just is trying to force it. Then suddenly her dad gets really sick, and in real life, and she has to go to the hospital and is there in the waiting room for days, seeing if he's going to pull through. And she said that at that point, she knew it had to be kind of a love letter to her dad. And you can feel that love throughout the story, because this one is just as much about their family as it is a romance, because Gus is doing his best to raise Riley, and from the very beginning, I think it's chapter 4, he forgets her at soccer practice.
Yeah.
Cam is off with Graham, who he keeps calling Greg, studying to be a lawyer, and Gus is in charge of Riley for the whole summer. And it's just devastating to him because he always does everything right. He never forgets anyone, and it really hurts him. And you can feel that hurt is real while Lyla is writing. And I thought, wow, how cool that she did that. And she wanted to devote this to her dad. And we see so much of these dads, because we see so much of Hank too. Teddy's dad. He's a retired drummer, but he's very sick. And she has to she's kind of a stay-at-home nurse. They eventually get a different person to help care for him, but she is spending all of her energy trying to make sure that he is okay. And you can see that kind of real experience in this book. And I thought that really does, that is the book's voice, is that relationship between father and daughter. It's just I don't know, I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
The emotion in the book.
Yeah, I hope that as we read further along in the romance genre this time around, we will find books with just as much heart and just as much kind of like emotional core to them. I think we got some good ones picked out. I think it's quite possible that we'll find that, but you never can tell before you read them. So yeah. And I think more so than the books we have coming up in the romance genre, I'm excited to see book 4 of this series.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Do you have a guess? Who do you think it's going to be?
Well, so I my ebook had a preview chapter of book 4 at the end.
Ah.
Yeah. So
okay.
I know who it's.
Well, it's obviously Dusty and Cam.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But,
so it's obvious.
Yeah. But it's a really good preview chapter. It's not how you would expect. Yeah.
Really?
Oh. Yeah.
I'm very excited for that. I want to say thank you to the Woody Banter Book Club again, because Courtney and Maddie told us. I was totally dumbfounded when we read this. They suggested the first book, I guess the second book we did with them, but you and I read Done and Dusted by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, it's going to be some sultry, silly cowboy romance. And then like 3 chapters in, I was like, oh my God, I have to keep reading. And I think every time I just do it in one sitting. They're not that long, but they really draw you in and you have to know.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Woody Banter.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
Yeehaw. Talk to you later, Zach.